Hello everyone and welcome to another video from my narrowboat. If you're new here, my name is Laura and I am a kitchen witch. I cook magical ritual recipes and show you how to put a bit of ceremony into your everyday. And I do it all from my tiny galley kitchen on board my boat. I bring you the stories of the plants and the foods which we eat, the folklore, the foraging, and use their magical properties to create intention and spell work that isn't just powerful, but is also delicious. Now, as a kitchen witch, I have my two very important things here. Beverage number one, which is a coffee using my creativity syrup. You can find the recipe for that in my book, Kitchen Magic. And I also have a cold brew tea. I think this one is strawberry lemonade. I didn't do the brew myself. This is Marks and Spencer's. So when I say that I'm a kitchen witch, that doesn't mean that I don't do any other kinds of magic. Today, I want to bring you a sort of witchcraft 101, something for the beginners, the baby witches, or even those who just want to brush up on their craft. I started learning about witchcraft when I was sort of 10 or 11. I think I started doing witchcraft earlier than that, but I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know why I was drawn to cutting off my hair and giving it to a tree or foraging nettles or making wishes on little toys that I had, why I collected crystals and marbles. I just didn't know why I was doing these things. And I will say that I'm old enough that the internet didn't really exist in this way, and YouTube certainly didn't exist when I was a kid or a baby witch or when I was first learning about this stuff, but this is the video that I would have wanted to watch. Hopefully I'm taking 25 plus years of knowledge and bringing it all into a succinct video for you so that you can figure out what kind of witch you are, or how you'd like to do magic, or just where to start, or what you need. I do have another video called What is a Witch, which kind of takes you through exactly what I mean when I say witch, because I'm not necessarily talking about pointy hats and broomsticks and black cats, although I won't say that I don't use those tools, but that's more because I love the spoils. I would highly recommend going to watch that video, especially if the idea of witchcraft or witchery or spell work is super new to you and you'd like to find out more about what that actually means in modern day. So I've split this video up into 7 chapters. As a kitchen witch, this video does lean heavily on kitchen witchcraft. It doesn't mean that the things that you learn within it can't be applied to other types of spells. I myself do other types of spells as well, and every time I do, people say, I thought you were a kitchen witch. But not every ritual that I have, not everything that I do is centered around food. That's just where I find my power. And that brings me neatly onto section 1. What kind of witch are you? So when I say that I'm a kitchen witch, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's my entire identity as a witch, and the kind of thing that you lean towards may not mean that that's the only kind of witch that you are, or it's the only kind of magic that you can do. Some witches don't even believe in splitting it up in this way, but I think it is just a simple way of explaining where your interests lie, where your power lies, the type of magic that you're interested in. It might be all of them, it might be none of them, it might be a mixture of 2 or 3 of them, or your practice may evolve. I certainly didn't start with kitchen witchery. When I look back to the things that I was doing as a kid, it kind of makes sense. But for the vast majority of my sort of witchcraft career, I wasn't doing food magic, I wasn't doing kitchen witchcraft. So, what are the different types of witches? I've kind of grouped them together. For example, a kitchen witch is sometimes called a hearth witch or a cottage witch. These are all slightly different, but they're all very similar. They're quite home-based, food-based, very cozy. I find that kitchen, cottage, hearth magic is quite a good way of practicing as a solo witch. You don't really need anyone else. You don't necessarily need a coven. Cooking can be quite a solo activity. It doesn't have to be, obviously, but I find that kitchen witchcraft is a way of doing really simple spells all the way up to like huge ceremonial feasts. There's a whole different spectrum. This interest in kitchen witchcraft does bleed out into other types of witch as well. So I've coupled together green witch, herbal witch, hedge witch, and garden witch. These witches tend to have a real interest in plant magic, in herbal magic, perhaps in foraging, perhaps in growing plants as a form of magic. You can be a green hedge, herbal, garden witch without doing any kind of kitchen witchcraft, and vice versa, but they often do have crossover. And then you've got sea witches, river witches, blue witches, water witches. Again, you can probably imagine what this is. Witches who use the sea, they use water, they use rivers. They're probably a water sign like me. They're probably interested in creating moon water or talking to the rivers, or, you know, they might live by the sea or find power in the sea. You may be a divination witch, a witch who's interested in tarot, in runes, in scrying. You may be a cosmic witch, interested in the stars, in astrology. An astral witch, interested in spirit travel, astral projection. There are many other different types of witch. If you're a mix of all of these, you might be considered an eclectic witch. So you're mixing all of these different traditions, all of these different types of magic. You might find your power spread across all of these. I think to a certain degree, we've all got elements of these different types of magic within us, but most of us lean to sort of one or the other. And you can probably guess that I know the most about kitchen witchcraft, herbal witchcraft, so that's going to be my focus for this video, just because that is where my practice primarily lies. But I'd be really interested to hear what kind of witch you are and how you came to that conclusion. Is it just a personal leaning towards the sea? Is it because of where you live and your environment around you? Is it because of how you were brought up? Please let me know in the comments what kind of witch you are and how you came to that conclusion. Can you hear the geese? You a goose witch. I did actually discover recently that there is a form of divination using birds. I think it's called orology. I'll put or orgology. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I thought that was really interesting. So please let me know in the comments what kind of witch you are, how you discovered that, how you figured that out, because I would love to know. It is important to recognize where all this knowledge came from, the roots of it, the roots of your specific practice, the traditions, the culture behind it, because all over the world we have witches. We have some form of magic makers or healers or mystics. It exists in almost every culture on earth, especially if you go back far enough. I think looking back at this is not just important to know where everything came from and give it its credence, but also to recognize the persecution of witches and the persecution of practicing magic, not just historically, but also today. I am going to do a video that fleshes this out a little bit more, so please forgive me that I'm skipping over such an important topic, but I think it is important that we do recognize that there are still places where people who practice magic or people who are suspected of practicing magic are persecuted, even murdered. It's not just the medieval witch trials or the 17th, 18th century witch craze. It happened specifically in Europe a lot, but it's still happening in other places. Again, if you want to hear more about the history, the foundations of where the image of the witch has come from, there are so many resources online and they're fantastic, but if you do have the funds to spend on some research books, I highly recommend looking at books, because this research can only come from you. It's a heavy topic and it is one worth looking at. Folk magic traditions and their origins are integral to any practice, and these early sort of pagan traditions have evolved into the modern sort of witchcraft that we have today. Different practices will have different roots of origin. The practice that I tend to be most familiar with and that I am most aligned with is sort of a Celtic pagan practice. Again, that's probably got a lot to do with the natural world around me. I'm from the UK, I'm British, so naturally those are the sort of traditions and roots of leaning that I go towards. But if you're from somewhere else in the world and you have different plants and traditions and culture and history surrounding you, you may well have a different origin of research to look at. Witchcraft at its core is deeply connected to the rhythms of nature and the everyday lives of people throughout history. Long before it was written in grimoires or practiced in ceremonial circles, it lived in the hands of herbalists and wise folk, midwives who knew how to work the plants, read the seasons, and honour the unseen. Folk magic was often rooted in practicality, things like charm bags and amulets for protection, whispered spells for healing, and rituals passed down through generations. When we look at things like kitchen witchcraft, in Scandinavia, for example, they had kitchen witch dolls. These were hung in homes to bring good luck and ward off misfortune, symbols of domestic magic that carried both cultural and spiritual meaning. There are so many interesting folk practices in places like Cornwall, Devon, Scotland, Dorset, Norfolk, and a lot of these centre around the harvest traditions. To me, if your roots of magical practice do come from Celtic magic or, you know, British pagan magic, it kind of makes sense that you would then evolve that into some form of green witchery or kitchen witchery or something based around food, because our entire wheel of the year and so many of those mystical practices are based around the harvest. So for example, we have a folk tradition called crying the neck. This is an old harvest tradition that originated in southwest England, again in places like Devon, Cornwall, Dorset. It was practiced by agricultural workers as a ceremonial way to mark the end of the grain harvest. So this was especially in the days when reaping was done by hand. At the end of the harvest, the final sheath of wheat or barley, called the neck, was cut with special reverence. This sheath symbolised the spirit of the crop, which was believed to dwell in the last standing stalks. One of the workers would hold up the neck and shout, "I haven't, I haven't, I haven't," which means I've got it, I've got it, I've got it. And the group would respond, "What have ye? What have ye? What have ye?" And the harvester would reply, "A neck, a neck, a neck." And the group would cheer in celebration. This ritual honoured the spirit of the grain, thanked the land for its bounty, and ensured future fertility. The neck was often kept in the farmhouse or offered to the animals to bless the coming year's crops. Today, crying the neck is sometimes reenacted at rural festivals or revived by modern pagans and folklorists who wish to honour the traditional ties to the land. So again, it's a beautiful example of how agriculture, the harvest, and these ceremonial ritual activities were very much intertwined and seen as something quite normal. Some people would make corn dollies, for example, with the last sheaths of the harvest and keep them for the coming year's harvest to ensure a good crop. There are traditions like this that go back hundreds, probably even thousands of years, but many of them have been lost over time. I find that practicing witchcraft, practicing this modern invocation of ritual, ceremony, paganism, is a way of connecting, not necessarily to the ancestors, although some people want to do that. For me, it's a way of connecting to the land. And so looking into this history and bringing these folk practices into your own personal practice is really integral to magic. And little plug, but if you'd like to learn more about some of these folk practices and how you can invoke the meaning of them, the ritual of them into modern day practice to utilize some of the old ideas into something new and delicious, the link to my book Folk Magic is in the description, and every single recipe in here is a vehicle for folklore or talking about one of these ritual practices or the origins of witchcraft. It's just, yeah, it's a really good way to learn about these kinds of things, so highly recommend. One thing that I love about kitchen witchcraft is that it is so grounded in the everyday. It is grounded in our day-to-day lives, in the domesticity of our day-to-day lives, and therefore you probably don't need to buy anything to practice. You may want to add some fun spoils to your larder or to your kitchen tools, but even a spoon, any old spoon, is suddenly transformed into a magic wand. Any broom, or cloth or cleaning equipment or any plain old jar of dried herbs is suddenly a vehicle for your intention. So I am going to give you an idea of some of the things that you may want to stock in your kitchen or have laying around as tools, but chances are you may already have them. You don't necessarily have to spend any money or go on any kind of hunt to find tools for kitchen witchcraft. Kitchen witchcraft is a way of transforming your day-to-day routines into rituals for nourishment and intention. Rituals, not habits. It's an earth-based practical form of magic where the kitchen becomes a sacred space and cooking is a form of spell work. So whether you're preparing a simple soup or baking bread, every ingredient and every movement that you make can carry magical intention. So first of all, tools and supplies. Probably the most important thing to have in kitchen witchcraft is herbs. And again, not to keep going on about it, but I do have a section in my book that's called The Witch's Store Cupboard that has a glossary of all of the most used herbs and their magical meanings. Some of the most versatile staples include sage for wisdom and cleansing, rosemary for remembrance and protection, and thyme for courage. These serve as both culinary and magical tools. I'm sure everyone has a knife in their kitchen. I would encourage you to get one knife that you use over and over again. I know we use different knives for different things, but maybe you invest in one particular knife that you like using, and this becomes a charged tool. You can charge it under moonlight if you wish to. Some people refer to this as their athame. It directs energy while chopping foods or carving symbols or sigils into them. Candles are essential for every witch. Candles are probably the thing that is used most in all different types of witchcraft. Candles, crystals, and a journal or a book of shadows. You will want an array of colours for your candles for different intentions. However, if you only have white candles, you can ascribe pretty much any intention to a white candle. It's all about your intention. It's all about what you are putting onto your tools. Again, different tools can denote different intentions. I have a few hand-carved spoons that are made from different types of wood, and then those woods correspond with the intentions that I'm setting. So for example, I have a carved oak spoon, and that is for strength and resilience. I also have a birch spoon for cleansing. If you're a crafty person, you can even make your own stirring wand from rowan or hawthorn or elder. Again, these all have different types of properties, but the spoon and the knife is an example of how you can take any old mundane tool and suddenly turn it into something magical, either by charging it or using intention, or choosing a tool that has some kind of correlation with the intention that you wish to set, whether that's the material that it's made from, the color that it is, or just a feeling that it gives you when you use it. The last tool that I would say is not just integral for any kitchen witch, but any witch, is a journal, a book of shadows, a grimoire, a way of recording how you feel, a way of recording your own spell work, a way of recording your thoughts, your notes, creating your own spells, figuring out what gives you power. And for a kitchen witch, this also can double as a cookbook for creating delicious recipes. That's how I made my own book. I took my own grimoire, my own book of shadows that was just full of recipes, and I sort of expanded that into a full book. So as well as some tools, I want to give you some everyday practices, some everyday ways of blending magic into the mundane. Infusing your tea with specific types of energy by using specific herbs, again lighting a coloured candle while you make it, stirring with intention, clockwise to bring something in, anti-clockwise to banish it out. Threshold magic is great for any witch who likes to practice within their home, so sprinkling a bit of salt or protective herbs around your thresholds, blowing cinnamon out of your doorway on the first of the month or special occasions when you want to make wishes. If you're a kitchen witch and you have room, then building an altar in your kitchen is a really nice thing to do. When I grow up and I have a house, I want to have a wooden table where I can have an altar of my vegetables for the week. So laying out my veg almost like a painting, not putting it away, not storing it away. I forget what I've got if I do that. I need to see my produce on display. So I would have candles, I would have cloths, I would have crystals, I would make a full display out of my veg and my fruit, and then I know what I've got, and I think it would look really beautiful as well. There are ways to build amazing, beautiful altars just with food. Some people like to change their altars seasonally, or depending on what they're trying to manifest. If you are trying to manifest money, for example, your altar might be full of green candles, it might be full of a money bowl or coins. Money bowl. Speaking of money bowl, I currently have a money bowl or abundance bowl that sits on top of the advanced copy of my book, because we are still in pre-order season. So this is my way of charging my book to get those pre-orders in. So yeah, depending on what you are trying to manifest, that will change up your altar, change up the colors, change up what's on there. If you're the kind of witch who is interested in deities, you might have some offerings for deities. And food offerings is something very integral to kitchen witches. You may wish to share a portion of your meal with nature, with outside, with the ancestors, the deities, your house spirits. And I'll be honest, this isn't really a practice that I picked up until I went to Bali. Bali has a tradition called Kanang Sari, where they leave these beautiful plates of food and flowers and offerings to the gods on a stand outside their houses, and they change them every single day, sometimes more than once a day. I rented a house for 6 weeks in Bali a couple of years ago, and I had a housekeeper who would come and change that every single day, and there would be incense and fruit, and there'd always be something new on it. And I was really intrigued by this, so I had a conversation with her, and I asked if it would be okay if I did it, to save her coming to the house every single day. I didn't know if that was like allowed, if it was okay, so I asked her if that's something that she wanted, and she said that she was happy for me to do that, and it meant it also saved her a journey, which was good. So yeah, then I started making them, and it was a practice that I now have sewn into my everyday. I do that whenever I cook something more elaborate. You know, if I'm just making coffee or porridge, I won't necessarily do it, but if I'm baking specifically, I always feed the birds. I always give an offering outside. I'm trying to give back. In order to figure out what kind of witch you are or where your magic lies, the best way to do it is to just start practicing. Just try all of these different things, try them on, see how they feel. And again, this is where your book of shadows or your journal or your grimoire really comes in handy, because you can look back across that and see what spells have worked, where you felt your power lies. Record your dreams, use dream magic, try astral projection, try meditation, and just follow your line of interest. In order to create your first spells, you kind of need to know the basic principles of how to create that, based around like the ingredients of a spell, if you like. And this applies to all different types of magic, or at least this sort of Celtic pagan version of magic and witchcraft, but I mean, it's not centered around kitchen witchcraft. These are things like the meanings of colors. This will determine what colored candle you use for your intention. The phases of the moon. This will determine when you create your spells. The days of the week. Again, determining when best to do your spell. Each spell is broken down into the elements. So air is usually represented by incense, and again, you will choose a flavor of incense that corresponds with your intention. So sage, patchouli, sandalwood, myrrh, whatever it may be. Fire is represented by the candle, and again, the color of the candle will correspond to the intention of your spell. Earth is usually represented by a crystal, but you could use anything really. I use food, and that's why my practice isn't super crystal heavy. That's not to say that I don't use them in my practice. Sometimes I do. I have a great sauerkraut recipe where the sauerkraut is weighed down by crystals, but for the most part, I don't necessarily need a candle, because I'm usually cooking over the top of a fire, or I'm cooking on my hob. But I do often use candles because I like the ability to add in that color, but you can use the color of the food as well. Water, again, is represented by the liquids that I'm using. Most witches open and close a circle, and this just means setting a boundary, setting a protective boundary within which you're going to work. It's kind of like saying start and finish. finish. Open curtain, close curtain. You're just containing all of the magic into one time and place. But you don't have to open and close a circle, and many kitchen witches like myself don't necessarily open and close a circle. There are no rules to witchcraft. You can kind of do what you want, do what feels right to you. The only times really when I do open and close a circle is when I'm working with others. It's a way of setting everyone's mind into the right place. Many people plan their spells around the moon phases because the moon phases and the sabbats all have different meanings. A lot of these spells may have some element of divination. You may want to try your hand at tarot, try your hand at runes, try your hand at scrying. And again, just to promote myself again, I do have a tarot deck called the Ritual Kitchen Tarot Deck. I illustrated all 78 cards myself. And it comes with a recipe book that has the meanings of the card and how that corresponds to a food or a herb or a tea or a recipe, and it has all the recipes in here. So if you would like that, the link is also below. But yeah, I highly recommend just trying your hand at all these different things. Try creating a spell from scratch. Have a look at the different colours, the meanings, the moon phases, the crystals, the incense. And even if it feels clumsy and awkward and you don't know what you're doing, just try it. Just see it as something fun. I challenge you to find me a witch that doesn't have some moral compass or form of ethics, because I think pretty much everyone who practices witchcraft or who's done their research and they've done their learning, they seem to have a strong ethical moral compass, which is great. I think it really shows the kind of people that are drawn towards witchcraft. And that doesn't necessarily mean that these witches don't practice any form of hexing or baneful magic. A lot of witches believe in the threefold law, or the idea of harming none. So the threefold law is that anything you put out there into the universe comes back on you times 3, kind of like an elevated version of karma. And for that reason, they don't practice baneful magic. For me, that's kind of like the idea of being a good person because you don't want to go to hell. It's kind of like the idea of consequences. I do definitely have some belief in karma, but it's not the reason why I try to live a good life and a moral and ethical life. Many witches also believe in the boundaries of consent, hopefully. So doing anything that is against another person's will, manipulation spells, love spells, these are considered very taboo amongst the communities. Most people don't practice them. However, I do think there are instances where baneful magic and hexing is called for, and maybe that's a really controversial thing to say. I could make an entire video about this if you would like me to, because there's so much that goes into it, and I know that as a top line headline, Laura believes in baneful magic, Laura wants you to hex people, sounds quite inflammatory, but I do have my reasons and I would love to explore them fully. But yeah, I just think some people have what's coming to them and you can use your powers for good. So while I don't necessarily practice baneful magic, I also don't believe in this sort of white witch theory. I think one of the things that paganism and witchcraft has taught me in particular is that there is no such thing as good and evil. There is no such thing as good and bad. Like if you look at nature, for example, nature has death, it has murder in quotes, it has, you know, nature is brutal sometimes, and it doesn't necessarily have any moral implication. It just is what it is. Now, as humans, we have an added layer of morality, so we can't just go around like murdering and eating each other. Like, there are reasons why we have laws and ethics against that kind of thing. So I'm not saying that we are nature, but I just think sometimes we put this added layer of morality where it's not needed. And I don't love this idea of good and bad. I think there is so much nuance in the middle. So yeah, if you would like a longer video about that, I'd love to fully expand and show my working, because I know that sounds controversial. In terms of ethics and identity, however, most witches agree that there are certain closed practices that we don't touch. If there are cultures or traditions who have asked other witches, or you know, people who are just even mildly interested, not to use a certain herb, white sage being a good example, or you know, not to buy a certain thing. So one thing that I've heard recently is that Palo Santo is really hard to grow, very unsustainable to buy it. So, you know, if you've been told not to buy it because it's unsustainable, I think you should sort of listen to people who are giving you that information. And for the most part, I would say most witches do that. They take on board what's being said and they leave it alone. Having said that, you can grow your own sage, of course, and just normal everyday non-white sage is fine. But don't worry if you trip up in the beginning. Like, if you don't know, you don't know. I'm sure most people on a witchcraft path have been into like a woo-woo shop and bought some Palo Santo or bought some white sage. I know I have, before I knew that that wasn't, you know, the done thing. That was a closed practice, and the people who do use it want you not to touch it. I think that's fair enough. Obviously, not every culture is a monolith. There'll be people within that culture who want to share their practices and will say, no, this isn't a closed practice. And I guess if you are learning from them directly or being given permission directly, then that's very different to you just deciding, I'm just going to do it anyway. And lastly, I would say to define your own path. There is no right or wrong way necessarily. You have to find your way on your own. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. Be respectful, of course. I mean, again, it's up to you if you don't want to be respectful, but like I say, I do believe in karma and I do think baneful magic is warranted, so just be careful. The first one is to burn incense or candles. I love a day candle, for example. Like, you don't have to use candles at night. You can have a candle burning in the day. Obviously, health and safety. Make sure with an open flame that you don't leave it on its own, etc., and that it's not going to set fire to anything. But I just love a day candle. I think they're so calming. They really set the tone and the vibe of your space. They're great for ambiance. They're great for cleansing. You don't need to open a circle or be doing a big elaborate ritual to just have a candle burning. I mentioned this in my morning routine video, but barefoot grounding is something that I try to do every single day. So lucky for me, or unlucky for me, depending on how you look at it, my bins are a 2-minute walk from where I live. And this means I have the opportunity to do barefoot grounding. So I take my bins out in the morning and I take my shoes off and I put my feet on the grass, or if I'm going for a walk, I'll always make sure that I put my feet on the earth, and it's just a way of grounding myself. Again, I mentioned offerings. That's a really fantastic thing to bring into your everyday. Burning incense, doing small acts of self-care. You can create a skincare routine that is based and centered in ritual, just depending on the kind of things that you choose to use. Maybe you hand make some beauty products. Again, I have a video for that too. So thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. I really appreciate you sitting through all of that because it's a lot of information, and these are very much just a basic overview before you get started. A few tools that you can use in kitchen witchcraft, a few practices that you can use in kitchen witchcraft, what kind of witch you might be, the origins, the foundations of that, a way to research some of the things that you may want to look into, and some of the ethics and the moral implications that you might want to consider before you start. Again, thank you so much for putting up with me flogging my book and my tarot cards, but I really genuinely think that they are two tools that could help any witch on their journey. I'm so proud of what I've created. I love them both. And if you could even just click on the links below and just check them out and see what it's all about, I would massively appreciate it. Let me know in the comments some of the things that you would like to know from me. If you have any further questions, if there's anything in this video that you want me to expand upon, please let me know. And finally, let me know what kind of witch you are and how you figured that out, because I would really love to know. I'm sure not everyone watching considers themselves a kitchen witch, and I would love to know what kind of witch you are. So thank you again, and I will see you next week.